If you think the housing crisis is bad now, wait until you see what's coming by 2030. Experts across the board, economists, urban planners, housing researchers, are sounding the alarm. Not about the current crisis, but about what's heading straight for us. And yet, the government seems determined to press the accelerator. By 2030, Australia is on track to become one of the least affordable developed countries on Earth. Not by accident, but by design. In this exposé, we'll break down what's already failing, what will get worse, and why the next 7 years are critical to avoid a full-blown national collapse. Chapter 1. The forecast nobody wants to hear. According to the National Housing Finance and Investment Corporation, Australia faces a shortfall of 175,000 dwellings by 2027. Extrapolate that to 2030 with current trends, and we could be short by over 300,000 homes. At the same time, net overseas migration is expected to bring in over 1.5 million new people by the end of the decade. That's roughly adding a new Perth without building another Perth. And it's not just population growth, it's policy failure. State and federal governments continue to support mass migration while refusing to implement large-scale public housing, land use reform, or tax policy changes to discourage property speculation. If nothing changes, by 2030, housing will not just be unaffordable, it will be unattainable. Chapter 2. The price spiral that won't stop. Let's talk numbers. In 2023, the median house price in Sydney was already over $1.3 million. Melbourne was close behind at $920,000. And even regional towns like Ballarat and Coffs Harbour saw double-digit growth. By 2030, forecasts by CoreLogic and SQM Research suggest Sydney's median could approach $2 million. That's if current trends hold, and they're likely to accelerate. Rents are just as bad. In Brisbane, median rents rose 14.8% in a single year. By 2030, analysts project that the average rent for a two-bedroom unit in capital cities could exceed $850 per week. Wage growth? Stagnant. The average Aussie won't be earning anywhere near enough to keep up. Chapter 3. Generation Lockout. We're witnessing a new class of Australians, the locked out. By 2030, over 70% of Australians under 35 are expected to be long-term renters. That's not a lifestyle choice. That's a systemic failure. Young couples are being forced to live with parents until their 30s. Students are packed into share houses, 6 or 7 to a room. First home buyers now require on average more than a decade of saving just to afford a deposit. This isn't just about housing, it's about identity. Home ownership has long been the bedrock of middle-class stability in Australia. Remove that, and you hollow out the very idea of a stable life. Chapter 4. A nation of landlords and tenants. What we're really seeing is a two-class system. By 2030, the top 10% of property investors will own nearly 50% of all rental properties. These investors, many of them using negative gearing and capital gains tax discounts, are consolidating wealth while renters are stripped of options. Meanwhile, the government keeps rewarding speculation. Negative gearing costs taxpayers over $20 billion per year. That's money that could build public housing, renovate infrastructure, or subsidize rents. Instead, it props up an already bloated class of property moguls. Australia is no longer a country of owners. It's a playground for landlords. Chapter 5. The International Money Factor. Australia's housing market isn't just being squeezed by domestic policy. It's being hijacked by global capital. In 2023 alone, foreign investment in Australian residential property surged past $7 billion. Buyers from China, Hong Kong, Singapore, and even Canada are snapping up properties, not to live in, but to park their wealth. As other countries restrict foreign ownership, Australia remains wide open. By 2030, entire neighborhoods could be investor-owned ghost zones. Streets lined with dark windows, empty apartments, and rent hikes justified by artificial scarcity. Chapter 6. Building Not Fast Enough. The Albanese government has promised 1.2 million new homes by 2029. Sounds good? Look closer. That goal requires over 240,000 homes per year, a figure we haven't hit once in our modern history. In 2023, we managed around 180,000 during a boom. Material shortages, labor constraints, and slow local council approvals make that 1.2 million number more of a political fantasy than a construction plan. Even if we hit those targets, they won't be affordable homes. They'll be market-rate apartments built by developers looking for maximum return. The private sector cannot and will not solve this crisis alone. Chapter 7. What experts are really saying. The Grattan Institute, RMIT Urban Housing Lab, and even the Reserve Bank have all issued warnings. Housing supply is not meeting demographic needs. Policy incentives are distorting prices and concentrating wealth. Without urgent reform, housing inequality will become entrenched. Even the International Monetary Fund flagged Australia's housing market as one of the most vulnerable to global shocks due to high debt levels and speculative pricing. And yet, our leaders treat these warnings as background noise. Chapter 8. Public Housing, the Forgotten Fix. One of the most effective solutions is the one most ignored: public housing. In the 1980s, nearly 6% of Australians lived in public or community housing. Today, less than 2%. The waiting list in New South Wales alone exceeds 55,000 households. By 2030, without serious reinvestment, that list could triple. Instead of building government-owned housing, we rely on rent assistance, subsidies, and affordable housing definitions that are often anything but. The result? Billions spent helping people rent overpriced homes from landlords, while the root problem goes untouched. Chapter 9. The Social Consequences. This isn't just an economic issue, it's a social time bomb. As housing becomes more scarce and more expensive, we'll see increased homelessness, already rising year on year, worsening mental health, particularly among youth, delayed families and population decline, urban sprawl and environmental damage, greater political polarization as trust collapses. People who can't afford housing stop participating in society the same way. They stop voting, stop trusting institutions, and eventually stop believing in the system altogether. Chapter 10. The 2030 Tipping Point. Experts are calling it now. Without reform, Australia will reach a point of no return by 2030. We'll be too far behind in housing supply, too financially burdened by debt and inequality, too politically captured by property interests to fix it. The average Australian will spend over 40% of their income on housing. More than 50% of young Australians will never own property. Rents will exceed $1,000 per week in major cities, and homelessness will climb past 200,000 nationally. This isn't speculation. It's the path we are already on. Chapter 11. What needs to happen now? We still have time, but only just. Here's what the experts say must happen. Massive reinvestment in public housing. At least 25,000 homes per year. Reform tax incentives. Phase out negative gearing and reduce capital gains tax discounts. Cap foreign ownership in residential real estate. Create national planning benchmarks that force local councils to build. Redirect superannuation investment into affordable housing development. Legislate rent caps and stronger tenant protections nationwide. These aren't radical ideas. They're proven policy moves that other countries, like Finland, Singapore, and even Germany, have implemented with success. Final thoughts. Act or collapse. Australia's housing crisis isn't coming. It's already here. What's coming is collapse, unless we act. The window between 2024 and 2030 is the critical moment. The decisions we make in these next few years will determine whether the next generation lives in a functioning society or a fractured economy with no hope of escape. Housing is not just an economic asset, it's a human right. And if we continue to treat it like a stock market, we'll lose more than just affordability. We'll lose our social contract. While politicians claim the economy is recovering, 3.8 million Australian households are just 90 days away from financial collapse as mortgage repayments, rent, and grocery bills push them beyond breaking point.
Cost of living out here in Australia is crazy. Let me show you. 30 cans of Coke for $50. This block of cheese, nearly $14. $4.90 on offer for chocolate. No thanks. $7 just for some milk. How am I going to survive out here?
The Australian economy is back where it was for the best part of the past 2 years, where the average citizen was going backwards.
Vulnerable Australians are feeling the brunt of the cost of living crisis, often going hungry or without medication because of financial hardship.
The majority of Aussie households need to be taking home more than $100,000 every year to rent a unit without financial strain. It might sound high, but welfare groups say it highlights just how much the cost of living has crept up.
So many people, they just want to stop and lay roots. I represent people like nurses, teachers, everyday Australians that are earning a full-time wage and they can't afford to rent a granny flat.
There will be some impact on fruit and vegetable costs depending on how much of the farmland has been impacted.
In Sydney, a person earning $70,000 has to spend 65% of their income on rent. At $100,000, almost half their income on rent, and is still in rental stress, earning $130,000 annually.
Australia is sitting on an economic time bomb. While government officials boast about falling inflation and a strong economy, millions of everyday Australians are living a very different reality. The brutal truth is that household budgets across the country are stretched to breaking point. Mortgage holders are drowning in debt. Renters are facing impossible price hikes. And grocery bills continue to climb month after month. Most alarmingly, financial experts are now warning that we're just 90 days away from a potential economic meltdown. A point where mass defaults, bankruptcies, and financial collapse could trigger a crisis worse than anything we've seen in generations.
Simon Benson, writing in the Australian newspaper Today, makes the following point, that Australia's living standards are the worst in the developed world. No other developed nation in the world has suffered the decline in living standards anywhere near the magnitude of Australia. No amount of boasting that the household recession has finally come to an end can alter that reality. He continues, fresh OECD data in the form of updated data set on household income shows that even after the marginally better but still slightly grim economic news, Australia's living standards continue to be the worst in the world. And there's no bounce back coming soon, at least not within this decade.
Today, we're going to expose the real state of Australia's cost of living crisis, reveal the ticking time bomb that threatens to destroy millions of families' financial futures, and explain why the government's response has been woefully inadequate. Our analytics show many of you are still unsubscribed. Please hit that subscribe button to support our channel and never miss an update. Chapter 1. The 90-Day Countdown. The latest economic data paints a grim picture of Australia's financial health. While the government celebrates inflation falling to 2.4% in the March quarter, this statistic hides a much darker reality. Food inflation is still running at 3.2%, with grocery prices having risen by over 23% since 2022. Housing costs continue to skyrocket, with the median house price now over 12 times the median annual household income in Sydney and 10 times in Melbourne. Most critically, household savings have plummeted to their lowest levels in decades. The average Australian family now has less than 90 days of financial buffer before they would be unable to meet their basic obligations. Recent surveys show that 42% of households have no savings whatsoever and would be unable to cover an unexpected $1,000 expense. 1 in 3 mortgage holders is experiencing mortgage stress, spending more than 30% of their income on housing. The government wants you to believe that wage growth of 3.4% is outpacing inflation at 2.4%, suggesting Australians are getting ahead. But this ignores the cumulative impact of years of price increases that have far outstripped wage growth. Since 2020, prices have increased by over 20%, while wages have grown by just 11%. This isn't recovery. It's falling further behind in slow motion. Take the Thompson family from Brisbane. John, an electrician, and Sarah, a teacher, earned a combined income of $145,000 in 2020, solidly middle class. Today, despite both receiving small pay increases, their mortgage payments have doubled due to interest rate hikes. Their grocery bills have increased by nearly 40%. They've depleted their savings and are now one unexpected expense away from financial ruin. The Thompsons aren't alone. They represent millions of Australian families who did everything right, worked hard, saved, lived within their means, yet find themselves counting down to financial collapse through no fault of their own.
It is a moment where Australia is going backwards, and this government promised to make it better, instead worse, after the past 3 years. In fact, have a look at this. Life in the past 12 months, 31% of people saying that it is worse. Just 21% saying better. Everyone else basically saying pretty much the same. And of course, if life has been tough and it's still pretty much the same, then that's way over 50%.
Chapter 2. The Housing Nightmare. Housing costs represent the single biggest pressure point in Australia's cost of living crisis. The latest data from the Housing Crisis Snapshot reveals that 70% of renters are experiencing rental stress, while 26.2% of mortgage holders are in mortgage stress. In Sydney, the median house price has reached an astronomical $1.4 million, while Melbourne isn't far behind at $1.1 million. Even in previously affordable cities like Brisbane and Adelaide, housing costs have skyrocketed beyond the reach of average income earners. Rental vacancy rates have plummeted to historic lows of under 1% in most capital cities, giving landlords unprecedented power to raise rents. The average rental increase in the past year alone has been 14.6%, far outpacing wage growth of just 3.4%. Consider the case of Emma, a single mother of 2 working as a nurse in Melbourne. Despite earning above the median wage, she was recently forced to move for the 3rd time in 2 years after another substantial rent increase. Each move takes her further from her workplace, increasing her commute and childcare costs. She now spends over 60% of her income on rent alone. Or take Michael and Jessica, a young couple who saved diligently for 7 years to afford a deposit on their first home. They finally purchased a modest apartment in Western Sydney in 2021, stretching their budget to the limit. Since then, interest rate hikes have increased their monthly mortgage payment by $950, more than their entire discretionary income. They're now skipping meals to make payments and living in constant fear of losing their home. The government claims to be addressing the housing crisis, but their policies amount to little more than window dressing. Their much-touted Help to Buy scheme will assist just 10,000 households per year, a drop in the ocean compared to the millions in housing stress. Meanwhile, they continue to protect investor tax breaks like negative gearing and capital gains discounts that fuel housing speculation and drive up prices.
Elsewhere across the state, all households earning $70,000 are in rental stress. And with an income of $100,000, rents in the Blue Mountains and North and South Coast are still considered unaffordable.
Chapter 3. The Grocery Shock. While housing costs represent the biggest single expense for most households, it's the relentless rise in grocery prices that's pushing many families over the edge. The latest data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics shows food inflation running at 3.2%, significantly higher than the overall inflation rate. But this figure masks the true impact on everyday Australians. A basket of 9 basic grocery items that cost $41 in 2019 now costs $56 in 2025. A 37% increase in just 6 years. Fruit and vegetable prices have been particularly volatile, with some staples seeing price increases of over 50%. Walk into any supermarket in Australia today, and you'll see the evidence with your own eyes. A head of lettuce that cost $2.50 in 2020 now costs $5.80. A kilogram of beef mince has gone from $12 to $18. A loaf of bread from $2.80 to $4.50. These aren't luxury items. They're basic necessities that families can't do without. The major supermarket chains continue to report record profits while Australians struggle. Coles and Woolworths have seen their profit margins expand during the cost of living crisis, suggesting they're not just passing on higher costs, but actively increasing their profit take. Food bank usage has increased by 67% in the past year alone, with middle-class families now making up a significant portion of those seeking assistance. A recent survey found that 38% of households are regularly skipping meals to save money. 42% have switched to lower-quality food options, and 27% report going hungry at least once in the past month because they couldn't afford enough food. The government's much-touted price monitoring scheme has proven toothless, with no actual power to control or limit price increases. Food industry experts are warning that grocery prices are likely to remain elevated or even increase further throughout 2025 and beyond.
Bro, the cost of living in Australia is completely lad. Look at this, cuz. Look how cooked this shit is. $8 for milk. Wow, lad. Cuz $9 for butter. Wow. Lad, $50 for a 30 pack. What the fuck? Look at this block of cheese, $14. I was making this when I was working at Domino's, lad. What the Wow, lad. Cuz $2.20 just on groceries for the week for me and my missus. Like, that's absolutely cooked, bro. What the
Chapter 4. The Debt Trap. Perhaps the most alarming aspect of Australia's cost of living crisis is the explosion in household debt. Australia now has one of the highest household debt-to-income ratios in the world, at over 180%. The average mortgage has increased by 35% since 2020, while wages have grown by just 11% over the same period. This widening gap between debt and income is creating a dangerous trap that millions of Australians cannot escape. Interest rate hikes have pushed mortgage repayments to record levels. A typical Sydney homeowner is now paying $1,450 more per month on their mortgage than they were in 2021. For many families, this represents more than their entire discretionary income. But it's not just mortgages. Personal loans, car loans, and credit card debt are all increasing as households struggle to make ends meet. Buy now, pay later services have seen their customer base expand by 42% in the past year, as desperate Australians turn to these services just to cover basic necessities. Lisa Nguyen, a registered nurse with 15 years of experience, told us, "I never thought I'd be struggling like this. I work full-time at the hospital and pick up extra shifts driving for Uber on weekends just to cover my rent and bills. I've maxed out my credit cards, just buying groceries and paying utilities. If anything happens, if my car breaks down or I get sick and can't work, I'll be completely ruined." The debt trap creates a downward spiral that's nearly impossible to escape. As households take on more debt to cover essential expenses, their financial resilience decreases. Each new bill, each price increase pushes them closer to the edge. Eventually, they reach a breaking point where they simply cannot service their debt any longer. When this happens to enough households simultaneously, as financial experts warn could happen within the next 90 days, the consequences could be catastrophic. Mass defaults would trigger a cascade of economic impacts: banks tightening lending, property values plummeting, consumer spending collapsing, businesses failing, and unemployment rising. This is the economic meltdown that now looms on Australia's horizon. Conclusion. Australia's cost of living crisis isn't just a temporary challenge. It's a ticking time bomb that threatens to explode within the next 90 days. The combination of crushing housing costs, relentless food inflation, and unsustainable household debt has pushed millions of Australians to the brink of financial ruin. The government's response has been woefully inadequate, focused more on managing headlines than addressing the structural issues driving the crisis. Their claims of a strong economy ring hollow to the millions of Australians who are skipping meals, unable to heat their homes, or living in constant fear of losing their housing. What's most concerning is that we're now approaching a potential tipping point, a moment where the financial pressure becomes so great that mass defaults trigger broader economic contagion. The 90-day countdown has begun, and without dramatic intervention, Australia could face an economic meltdown that destroys the financial futures of an entire generation. The question now is whether our leaders will acknowledge the true scale of this crisis and take the bold action needed to defuse the time bomb, or whether they'll continue to fiddle while ordinary Australians burn. This isn't just a housing crisis, this is a ticking time bomb. And when it blows, it won't just wipe out property investors, it could bring the entire Australian economy down with it.
Authors of a new report into the rental market say Australia's housing crisis is the worst it's ever been.
1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, 7 tenants.
That's a garage.
That's a garage.
And how many people are living in that garage?
3 people live in there. 2 in one side and 1 in the other side.
Caroline, I mean, the number one cause that we have in this country is this massive unplanned migration intake that's been taking place since COVID. It has not been planned for, it hasn't had the consent of the community, and it also hasn't been targeted towards areas of economic need. So, we have a housing crisis because we've had this massive surge of demand coming from this massive migrant intake.
It's an inconvenient truth this Christmas. We are in the grip of a rental and homeless crisis, the likes we've never seen before in this, the lucky country. Too many people, not enough homes, creating misery and a sense of hopelessness.
The single biggest reason for the affordability crisis is that Australia hasn't been building enough homes to keep pace with its population increase. Record levels of immigration since borders reopened after COVID have laid bare the poor supply of housing. Pressures include overly complex and slow approval systems, a shortage of building materials and labour, and opposition to development by local residents, known as NIMBYism, which stands for Not in My Backyard.
In a sign of the times, a man is advertising on Facebook Marketplace single beds inside shipping containers for $200 a week on Queensland's Sunshine Coast.
Mum's begging for homes. Pensioners can't afford most rentals. Kids are sleeping in cars. Flood victims are living in tents. And to get a lease, you now need a renter's agent. Yup, things are so cooked, that's a real job now. Of course, if you don't like it, you can always piss off to the outback. Except you can't, because rents are skyrocketing there too. Welcome to the National Rental Crisis.
Chapter 1. A Nation Built on Real Estate. For years, property has been the golden goose of the Australian economy. Homes weren't just places to live, they were wealth machines. Buy now or miss out forever became the mantra. From Sydney to Melbourne, house prices surged by over 400% between the early 2000s and the late 2010s. The median house price in Sydney alone topped $1.3 million in 2023. While other countries diversified their economies, Australia became obsessed with real estate. It wasn't just homeowners driving the boom. Investors poured in, fueled by generous tax incentives like negative gearing and capital gains tax discounts. But beneath this frenzy, something darker was brewing. The foundations of a bubble so bloated it could snap the spine of the middle class. Property became a national obsession. Dinner table conversations shifted from footy and politics to suburbs and square meters. Ordinary Australians were being told they needed to get in the market or risk being permanently locked out. A generation of buyers was taught to view housing not as shelter, but as a leveraged path to financial salvation. The Australian government didn't just allow this bubble to form, it actively encouraged it. Policies like negative gearing, where investors could deduct property losses against their taxable income, made real estate more attractive than actual business ventures. Combine this with capital gains tax discounts, and you had an investor's paradise. Then came the stimulus spending. During the pandemic, programs like Home Builder injected billions into the housing market. Interest rates plummeted to record lows, making borrowing cheaper than ever. These actions turbocharged the market, but at what cost? The Reserve Bank, in hindsight, admits it kept rates too low for too long. Now those chickens are coming home to roost. Governments at all levels failed to create balanced policy. Instead of building affordable housing or investing in infrastructure to unlock new development corridors, they pandered to the investor class. Political donations from real estate interests poured in. Housing affordability became a talking point, not a priority. Chapter 2. The Interest Rate Trap. Between May 2022 and early 2024, the Reserve Bank of Australia raised interest rates from 0.1% to 4.35%. That's a more than 40-fold increase in less than 2 years. For a heavily indebted nation, where the average mortgage is north of $600,000, this has been devastating. Mortgage repayments have doubled or even tripled for many. According to the ABS, over 1 in 3 borrowers are in some form of mortgage stress. Households are cutting back spending, slashing savings, and struggling to stay afloat. If rates rise further, or even stay this high for long, it could trigger a wave of defaults. That's how bubbles pop. Debt that once seemed manageable under low rates has become a crushing burden. Young families are skipping meals, missing holidays, and deferring medical care just to keep their mortgage repayments up to date. The RBA, caught between controlling inflation and avoiding recession, has few tools left that don't cause pain. Chapter 3. The Investor Domino Effect. Property investors, once the darlings of Australia's housing economy, are now under siege. Rising interest rates have eaten into rental profits. Meanwhile, new regulations in states like Queensland and Victoria are capping rent increases and pushing for more tenant protections. Some landlords are already exiting the market. Data from CoreLogic shows investor listings have spiked by over 25% in certain areas. Many bought at inflated prices and now find themselves underwater. When investors start dumping properties en masse, it sets off a chain reaction. Prices drop, more panic sell, and the bubble deflates rapidly. Investors chasing quick capital gains are now stuck with negative equity and tenants demanding repairs. The rental yield fantasy has turned into a bureaucratic nightmare, and with inflation biting, many are desperate to liquidate. Governments love to talk about helping first-time buyers, but in reality, these schemes often pour more fuel on the fire. Grants, stamp duty exemptions, and shared equity schemes increase demand without addressing the real issue, supply and affordability. The median income earner now needs 10 to 15 years just to save a 20% deposit in major cities. By the time they buy in, they're often saddled with 30-year mortgages at high interest. They're not building wealth. They're joining the next wave of financial casualties. For many first home buyers, the dream becomes a trap. They stretch themselves to the limit just to secure a loan. One interest rate hike, one job loss, one medical emergency, and they're on the edge. Chapter 4. Building Industry on the Brink. It's not just buyers who are suffering. The construction industry is in crisis. More than 2,000 building companies have collapsed since 2021. Fixed-price contracts became unsustainable due to rising material costs, labor shortages, and inflation. Builders can't make a profit. Projects stall midway. Clients are left without homes. Government oversight has been minimal at best, and cowboy operators continue to exploit loopholes. This supply-side chaos only worsens the housing problem. With fewer homes being completed and rising population growth, pressure on existing housing stock continues to rise. Many builders say they're hanging on by a thread. Subcontractors go unpaid, materials are delayed, insurers are walking away, and the backlog of incomplete homes leaves thousands in limbo, paying rent while owing mortgages on unbuilt shells. Chapter 5. Immigration surge meets no supply. Australia's migration program is back in full swing. Over 700,000 new migrants arrived in the 2022 to 2023 period alone. While migration is essential for long-term growth, the timing couldn't be worse. These new arrivals are competing for the same rental and housing stock that's already at crisis point. Rents in Sydney rose by 24% in 1 year. Vacancy rates are below 1% in many areas. This isn't just a squeeze, it's a chokehold. And yet planning approvals have plummeted. According to the Housing Industry Association, new home starts are down by over 40% compared to pre-pandemic levels. Without adequate infrastructure or housing policy, the immigration surge has unintentionally intensified the affordability crisis. It's not the migrants' fault. They're entering a broken system. But the system wasn't ready, and now everyone's paying the price. Chapter 6. Household Debt. A nation addicted to credit. Australia has one of the highest levels of household debt in the developed world. As of 2024, household debt stands at 190% of disposable income. This is largely driven by mortgages. When interest rates were low, this didn't seem like a problem. But now, it's a disaster waiting to happen. People have over-leveraged based on artificial pricing. A 10% correction in home prices could wipe out the equity of millions. A 20% correction could spark panic. Remember, house prices don't have to collapse all at once. They just need to stop rising for the system to start breaking. This debt culture was normalized by decades of rising home values and easy credit. But that illusion is cracking. As repayments surge, household spending shrinks, and with it, the broader economy. With home ownership becoming a fantasy, more Australians are renting. But the rental market is in crisis too. Weekly rents have hit record highs, especially in major cities. Essential workers, nurses, teachers, tradies are being pushed to the fringes or into homelessness. Rental assistance hasn't kept pace, incomes haven't kept pace. And with many landlords selling, the available rental stock is shrinking. This leaves tenants with fewer options, rising costs, and decreasing stability. Some renters are now competing with 50 other applicants for a single property. Others are sleeping in cars, couch surfing, or living in unsafe accommodation. It's a humanitarian issue, happening in one of the world's wealthiest nations. Chapter 7. Could the government actually let it fall? Here's the billion-dollar question. Would the government really let the housing market crash? The answer might surprise you. While politicians talk a big game about affordability, they know that a housing collapse could sink the banks, wipe out retirement savings, and tank consumer confidence. So, the system is propped up with more band-aids, rate freezes, grants, investor incentives. But all this does is inflate the bubble further. Australia's housing market is like a plane running on fumes, gliding on momentum and denial. But gravity always wins. The political cost of inaction is growing. Voters are fed up. Young Australians see no path to ownership. Renters are organizing. The question is not whether the collapse will be allowed, it's whether it can be avoided at all. Let's not sugarcoat it. If this bubble bursts, the fallout could be catastrophic. Property prices could drop by 20 to 40% in key markets. Major banks could face liquidity crises due to defaulting loans. Construction job losses could skyrocket. Renters and owners alike could face homelessness. Consumer spending would collapse, plunging the country into recession. We've seen this before. 2008 in the US, 1990s in Japan, and more recently in China's property crisis. Australia isn't immune. Super funds invested in property trusts could be hit. State budgets reliant on stamp duty would shrink. Insurance claims would rise. The ripple effects would touch every corner of Australian life. Chapter 8. Can Australia be saved from itself? The road back starts with honesty. Acknowledge that the market is broken, that current policies have failed, and that radical reform is needed. Here's what experts are calling for. End negative gearing and capital gains tax discounts. Massively invest in public and affordable housing. Introduce rent caps and tenant protections. Regulate building standards to prevent industry collapse. Diversify the economy away from real estate dependence. These aren't easy fixes. But without bold action, the collapse will be far worse. Real change means challenging powerful interests. It means enduring short-term pain for long-term stability. But unless Australia chooses reform, the market will force it upon us. Final thoughts. The clock is ticking. Australia's housing bubble is not just unsustainable, it's actively harming the future of a generation. From renters being priced out to young families crushed by debt, the dream of a fair go is slipping away. We can act now, or wait until it's too late. While politicians smile for the cameras, Australia has just entered a recession that's already emptying your wallet and threatening your job.
Australia's economy is expected to take a $13 billion hit.
We're entering a new era as the global economic system that has operated for the last 80 years is being reset.
Well, there is really an outbreak of economic illiteracy in the political class in this country, in the media class. I fear that Jim Chalmers is suffering from it.
News today that our economy is slowing further, so that under Labor we have plunged once more back into a per capita recession. Wow, those good times didn't last long, did they?
That means per person the economy is going backwards, and it's gone backwards for 9 of the last 11 quarters, almost continuously, apart from 2 quarters. Over the last 3 years, the economy has gone backwards when measured on a per-person basis.
At the local school fundraiser last weekend, I overheard a conversation between 2 parents. One of them, a nurse named Sarah, mentioned they're skipping their annual family holiday this year, first time in a decade. "We just can't make the numbers work anymore," she sighed, glancing at her kids playing nearby. Sarah's experience mirrors what's happening across Australia right now. Millions of families are feeling the squeeze, and there's a clear reason for it. The Australian Bureau of Statistics just confirmed what you've been experiencing. Our economy is officially in a per capita recession. Today, I'm cutting through the political spin to show you what this really means for your family, who's responsible, and most importantly, how to protect yourself as things get worse. Chapter 1. The numbers don't lie.
And remember, when your increased electricity bill hits your family budget, it also adds to the burden on small business and on major industries, and it fuels inflation, pushing up the cost of just about everything. So it's not just the hip pocket pain, it's the undermining of all of our economic prosperity.
In Brisbane, a small cafe that's been operating for 15 years just put up a staff wanted sign. Not because business is booming, but because the owner, James, had to let 2 people go. When customers come in now, they order just a coffee, skipping the cake or sandwich they might have added before. Everyone's watching every dollar. This cafe is a microcosm of what the economic data confirms. Our economy grew by just 0.2% in the March quarter, down from an already weak 0.57% in December. With population growing at 0.4%, each person's slice of the economic pie got smaller. Think about it like this. Imagine you and 9 friends share a pizza every Friday. The pizza's been getting 2% bigger each week, but suddenly 3 new people join your group. The pizza's still growing, but your individual slice is getting smaller. That's exactly what's happening to Australia's economy right now. Year on year, the picture is even clearer. While the economy grew 1.3% since March 2024, our population grew by 2.0%. That means GDP per person is down 0.7% over the year, the worst annual decline outside of a pandemic since the 1990s recession. And unlike previous economic challenges, this one can't be blamed on a global financial crisis or pandemic. This recession is homegrown.
So from what I can see, small businesses are struggling. They've got more costs involved with input. Wages are going up in some regard.
By the way, if you're new to the channel, subscribe now for unfiltered truth about what's really happening to our country. Chapter 2. The Real-World Impact. A recent community forum in Perth revealed just how widespread the economic pain has become. Lisa, a healthcare worker with over a decade of experience, stood up and shared her frustration. "I'm doing everything right. I've got a good job, I don't splurge on luxuries, but I still can't get ahead. My rent just went up another $50 a week and the grocery bill keeps climbing. It feels like I'm running on a treadmill that keeps getting faster." Heads nodded throughout the room. Lisa's experience is playing out in homes across Australia. Housing costs have skyrocketed, with the average mortgage payment up 37% since 2022. Grocery prices have jumped 23%. Electricity bills are up 29%, but wages? They've grown just 11%.
Electricity bills will rise next month, despite the state government promising households would pay less under the LNP. But
the evidence is visible on any suburban shopping strip. Count the empty shopfronts with "for lease" signs. In the March quarter alone, over 12,000 Australian businesses shut their doors permanently. Behind each of those numbers is a family's dream collapsing. The job market statistics hide a troubling reality. Australia has lost 45,000 full-time jobs in the past 3 months. While the unemployment rate sits at 4.1%, it masks the growing problem of underemployment. At industry networking events, you'll meet people like Michael, a graphic designer whose workload has dropped from 40 hours weekly to just 15 to 20 hours. On paper, he's employed, but in reality, he can barely cover rent. For young couples across Australia, the housing market feels increasingly hopeless. At a recent housing affordability workshop, Emma and Josh, both professionals in their late 20s, shared how they've been saving diligently for 5 years. Despite their efforts, house prices keep outpacing their savings. The average first home buyer now needs to save for 9.2 years just to get a deposit. This isn't just about numbers. It's about Australian dreams being deferred or destroyed.
One thing that we know for certain is that we haven't hit the transmission and distribution parts of your bill yet. We've only hit the wholesale price. So a big cost is on the way. And how do people swallow that?
Chapter 3. Who's responsible? Remember the press conference after the May federal election? The Treasurer stood confidently at the podium claiming, "Australia's economy remains resilient."
Jim Chalmers is living on another planet when he tells us with all the uncertainty in the world, any growth is a decent outcome. This is not a decent outcome. Taking out the rise of GDP per capita in the last December quarter, 8 of the 9 past quarters have been negative GDP per capita, a reasonable measure of living standards. The economy is on life support, and it would be better to recognise this.
The disconnect between those words and what's happening in suburbs and regional towns across the country couldn't be more stark. The truth is, this recession didn't just happen. It was created through policy choices. The Reserve Bank's aggressive interest rate hikes over the past 2 years have hammered household budgets and crushed small businesses. Yes, inflation needed addressing, but the speed and scale of these increases have been devastating. Even with the recent May 2025 rate cut to 3.85%, mortgage holders are still paying significantly more than they were just a few years ago. Meanwhile, the government's record immigration program has boosted headline GDP figures while driving down living standards. Our infrastructure, housing, and services haven't kept pace with population growth. Energy policy chaos has left businesses facing some of the highest electricity costs in the developed world. A manufacturing industry conference in Adelaide last month revealed the extent of the crisis. Multiple business owners reported power bills doubling in 3 years, with some considering moving operations offshore because they simply can't compete anymore. And both major parties have failed to address Australia's productivity crisis. We're working harder but producing less value, with labor productivity declining for years. Internationally, China's economic slowdown has hit our exports, but let's be honest, many of our wounds are self-inflicted. Chapter 4. What happens next? At a recent economic briefing for industry leaders, the presentation's slides painted a grim picture. Off the record, economists are far more pessimistic than they admit publicly. Their forecast: prepare for at least 18 months of economic contraction. The worst is yet to come. The OECD recently downgraded Australia's growth forecast to just 1.5% for 2025, well below population growth.
The OECD has downgraded Australia's economic growth this year. It's expecting the economy will grow by 1.8%, down from 1.9%, which it had originally forecast. The organisation is warning federal and state governments to repair their budgets as data shows a record growth in welfare spending. It's also recommending Australia loosen its development regulations and cut red tape at all levels of government to ease the housing crisis.
The per capita recession is likely to continue through the year. For homeowners, there's a mixed outlook. The RBA's May rate cut to 3.85% provides some relief, but it's just the beginning of what would need to be a series of cuts to meaningfully reduce mortgage stress. Currently, about 15% of mortgage holders are in financial stress, and while the rate cut helps, economists suggest we need several more cuts before we see significant improvement in household finances. Job security will deteriorate further. Unemployment is forecast to rise to 4.5% by year's end, with underemployment potentially reaching 10%. That means more Australians competing for fewer jobs. Small businesses will continue to struggle as consumer spending remains weak. Another 15,000 to 20,000 closures are projected by December. The newly elected government will likely announce targeted spending measures to address the economic downturn, but with the budget already stretched, their options are limited. The scheduled tax cuts will mainly benefit higher income earners who are less likely to spend the extra money. Chapter 5. Protecting yourself. At a community financial workshop last month, financial counselor Maria Rodriguez shared practical advice for families facing economic uncertainty. Your emergency fund is your first line of defense, she emphasized. Aim for 6 months of essential expenses in a high-interest savings account. With job security deteriorating, this financial buffer is critical. The workshop also highlighted the importance of tackling high-interest debt immediately. Credit card interest rates are at record highs, averaging over 20%. Paying these down should be your priority. If you have a mortgage, the recent rate cut offers some breathing room, but don't get complacent. Consider using this opportunity to build a buffer by maintaining your previous payment amount if you can afford it. And if you're struggling with payments, contact your lender about hardship provisions before you fall behind. Diversifying your income has become essential in this economy. A recent survey of professionals who weathered the 2008 financial crisis showed that those with multiple income streams recovered faster. Take Smith, who after losing his marketing position, built a freelance business that now generates more than his previous salary. Having multiple income streams gives me security I never had with one employer, he explained during a career transition panel. Investing in your skills is equally important. Industries like healthcare, renewable energy, and cybersecurity are still growing despite the broader economic slowdown. Short courses or certifications in these areas could improve your employability. Finally, get politically engaged. Economic policy affects us all, and your voice matters. Hold politicians accountable for their economic management and demand better, long-term planning. The reality is clear. Australia is in a recession that's affecting real people in real ways. It's not just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's families canceling holidays, small business owners laying off staff, professionals struggling with rising costs, workers getting fewer hours, and young couples watching their home ownership dreams slip away. This isn't just a temporary blip. It's the result of years of policy failures and short-term thinking. And while global factors play a role, many of our wounds are self-inflicted. But Australians are resilient. In every economic downturn, those who stay informed and take proactive steps not only survive, but often emerge stronger. By understanding what's happening, preparing accordingly, and supporting each other, we can weather this storm. Australia isn't spiraling into some distant recession. It's drifting into an economic identity crisis that eerily mirrors Argentina's fall from grace. And the scariest part? Most Australians have no idea.
Right now, we have third world working conditions in a first world country.
Once one of the richest countries in the world, there are many reasons behind Argentina's decline, including the legacy of this man, Juan Domingo Perón. He introduced the 8-hour workday, increased wages for the poor, and created vast, expensive welfare schemes. Today, Argentina's debt to the IMF is more than double that of Egypt, the second highest borrower. All told, Argentina holds almost a third of all of the IMF's total lending. Countries like Britain have experienced annual price rises on par with the world average, in high single digits. Argentina's inflation hasn't been that low in decades. The rate has been higher than 100%.
In the 1970s, a Nobel Prize-winning economist said there are 4 types of economy: developed, developing, Japan, and Argentina. Japan's economy was like a guy being fired out of a cannon and drifting back to Earth on a parachute, up fast, then gently down. But Argentina's economy is like a roller coaster. Argentines are sometimes the richest people in South America, and sometimes half the population slides under the poverty line. The one constant is inflation.
Chapter 1. The Fall of Argentina, a cautionary tale. Let's rewind. In the early 1900s, Argentina was one of the richest countries in the world. Its economy was booming. It was the Australia of its day, a land of opportunity, high wages, and endless resources. But by the mid-20th century, Argentina had begun a sharp decline. The reasons? Chronic government overspending, runaway inflation, political instability, and a growing dependency on foreign capital. Fast forward to today, and Argentina has defaulted on its debt 9 times. Its inflation rate has topped 100%. Its currency is almost worthless. And once again, its people are lining up outside banks, desperate to convert their pesos into something, anything, more stable. Now here's the alarming truth. Australia is showing signs of heading down a similar path. Australia's national debt has exploded. In 2008, it was under $60 billion. Today, it's pushing over $1.1 trillion. That's a growth of more than 1,700% in less than 2 decades. Much of this has been funded by issuing bonds, which works until interest rates rise. And rise they have. With inflation surging, the Reserve Bank has hiked interest rates aggressively. Suddenly, debt repayments are costing Australia billions more than forecast. It's the classic trap. Borrow heavily during the good times, then get squeezed when the economy tightens. Sound familiar? It's exactly what triggered Argentina's debt spiral. Chapter 2. Inflation, the silent killer. In 2022, Australia's inflation hit 7.8%, its highest level in over 3 decades. While it's since cooled slightly, the damage was done. Groceries, energy bills, rent, everything surged. Wages, however, didn't keep up. Real wage growth has been flat or negative, meaning Australians are poorer in real terms than they were 5 years ago. Argentina knows this story too well. Inflation erodes purchasing power, kills savings, and breeds resentment. Once confidence is lost in the value of money, economic chaos quickly follows. Australia isn't at Argentina's levels yet, but if inflation flares up again while wages remain stagnant, the pressure will only intensify. Then there's Australia's housing market, which has become one of the most unaffordable in the world. Sydney's median house price is now over $1.3 million. Young Australians are locked out. Investors dominate the market. Worse, government policy has enabled the madness through negative gearing, capital gains tax discounts, and lax lending standards. This mirrors what happened in Argentina before their 2001 collapse. Housing became an investment vehicle, not a necessity. When interest rates jumped, property values tumbled, leaving many with negative equity. Australia isn't immune. With high household debt among the highest in the developed world, any major correction could trigger a broader financial crisis. Chapter 3. Economic dependency on exports. Australia relies heavily on exports, especially to China. Iron ore, coal, and gas account for a massive chunk of GDP. But what happens if China slows down? We're already seeing signs. China's property sector is teetering, its economy is cooling, and trade tensions with the West are growing. Argentina also bet heavily on exports, especially beef and soybeans. When commodity prices fell or trade relationships soured, their economy collapsed. Over-reliance on a few sectors is a dangerous gamble. Diversification is essential, yet Australia continues to double down on resource extraction, leaving itself dangerously exposed. Chapter 4. Currency devaluation and the digital push. Argentina's peso has been devalued repeatedly. Trust in the currency is so low that US dollars are often used for large purchases. Every devaluation wipes out savings and fuels inflation. Australia isn't there yet, but the push toward a central bank digital currency, CBDC, has many on edge. Critics argue it could give the government unprecedented control over individual spending and savings. Combine this with growing national debt and fiscal mismanagement, and some fear a digital currency could be used to quietly devalue the Aussie dollar under the guise of stability. Argentina's decline wasn't just economic, it was political. Corruption, short-term thinking, and populist policies destroyed faith in the system. Sound familiar? In Australia, trust in government is at record lows. From mismanaged pandemic responses to opaque deals in the construction and defense sectors, many believe politicians serve their own interests, not the public. Policy flip-flops on energy, housing, and migration have left key sectors in chaos. Like Argentina, Australia risks becoming a country where politics is about surviving the next election, not building a better future. Chapter 5. The collapse of the middle class. A strong middle class is the backbone of any stable society. But in both Argentina and Australia, that middle is shrinking fast. Rising costs of living, stagnant wages, and a tax system that benefits the wealthy are squeezing everyday Australians. Home ownership is out of reach, retirement is becoming uncertain, and secure full-time jobs are being replaced with gig work. This echoes Argentina's slide into inequality. Once the middle class starts to crumble, social unrest often follows. One of the most overlooked issues is foreign control over domestic assets. In Argentina, key infrastructure and industries were sold off during their economic crisis. This led to widespread resentment and a loss of national identity. Australia is on a similar path. Chinese companies own stakes in ports, electricity grids, and agricultural land. Multinationals dominate retail and mining. While foreign investment can be positive, excessive control undermines sovereignty. If Australians feel they're losing their country to foreign interests, the social fabric could fray even further. Chapter 6. Is there a way to avoid becoming Argentina? Yes, but time is running out. Here's what Australia must do. Tackle the housing crisis head-on. Reform negative gearing and capital gains concessions. Build more public and affordable housing. Diversify the economy. Invest in technology, manufacturing, and green energy. Rein in government debt. Conduct audits, cut waste, and avoid over-reliance on borrowing. Protect the middle class. Raise the minimum wage, incentivize full-time employment, and reduce income inequality. Increase political accountability. Crack down on corruption and improve transparency. Limit foreign ownership of critical assets, especially in infrastructure, agriculture, and strategic industries. The question isn't whether Australia has the ability to change course. It does. The real question is, does it have the political will? Final thoughts. A warning, not a prophecy. Argentina didn't fall overnight. It happened slowly, with warning signs ignored and hard truths avoided. Australia still has time to steer away from the cliff, but that window is closing. If we continue on this path, ignoring debt, enabling corruption, letting inequality grow, then yes, Australia could very well become the next Argentina. Not because it has to, but because it chose not to listen. 3 countries, different continents, same path. The United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia are collapsing under the weight of their own bad decisions. And if you think Australia is immune, think again. What do Britain's failing NHS, Canada's housing nightmare, and Australia's broken economy all have in common? A formula: inflate the housing market, gut manufacturing, flood in people without infrastructure, and expect it to work forever. Well, it is not working, and the cracks are now impossible to ignore. In this deep dive, we are comparing the collapse of 3 nations that once led the world in prosperity, and why Australia is on the same cliff edge. Chapter 1. The British Decline. A warning from the past. Let us start with the United Kingdom. Once the most powerful empire on earth, now a nation where public services are crumbling, real wages have flatlined, and entire generations have been priced out of housing. Britain embraced deindustrialization early. In the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher's government dismantled the coal, steel, and car manufacturing industries. The promise was a shift toward a modern, service-based economy. The result? Northern England became a wasteland of joblessness and poverty. Wealth concentrated in London. The middle class shrank, and with it, social mobility died. Fast forward to today, the National Health Service is overwhelmed. Ambulances wait hours to admit patients. Over 7 million people are stuck on surgical wait lists. Trains barely run on time. Young people are being pushed into debt for degrees that lead nowhere. And while a small elite in London thrives off real estate and finance, the rest of the country is being left behind. Britain's decline was not caused by bad luck. It was engineered by decades of policy failures from both sides of politics. Chapter 2. Canada, the canary in the housing mine. Canada followed a similar trajectory. Once seen as a model of middle-class success, Canada is now a warning sign for nations chasing artificial economic growth. The country's economy is built on 2 things: real estate and immigration. The average Canadian house price now exceeds $1 million Canadian dollars in major cities, while wages have remained stagnant for over a decade. In Toronto and Vancouver, locals are being driven out of their neighborhoods. Investors, many of them overseas, scoop up entire blocks of homes. Foreign ownership is so rampant in some districts, 1 in 5 properties sits empty while locals live in tents. The government continues to flood the market with people, nearly 1 million newcomers in 1 year alone, without matching investments in housing, hospitals, or transport. Now Canadians are waking up to a crisis. Food banks are overwhelmed. Mortgage defaults are rising. Confidence in the government is plummeting. Sound familiar yet? Chapter 3. Australia. The same playbook, different accent. Now look at Australia. We too used to build. We had car factories in Melbourne, steel in Newcastle, shipbuilding in South Australia. We owned our banks, ran our airlines, and lived in homes we could afford. But that has changed. Over the last 30 years, we copied the British and Canadian model. And now we are feeling the same pain. We shut down car manufacturing, offshored supply chains, and now rely on imports for almost everything. Our biggest export is raw materials: iron ore, coal, gas, sent offshore and often sold back to us at inflated prices. The property market has been turned into a financial instrument. Investors hold over 30% of all housing. Negative gearing policies reward speculation over shelter. Foreign ownership is barely regulated. The average house in Sydney is now over $1.2 million. Renters are spending over 50% of their income just to keep a roof over their head. Young people are living at home longer, delaying families, and giving up on the dream of owning property. Meanwhile, immigration has surged past 500,000 arrivals per year, while housing construction lags, roads gridlock, and hospitals buckle under pressure. Chapter 4. The Collapse Formula, Step by Step. It is not a coincidence these three countries followed the same economic formula, and now face the same results. Step 1. Deindustrialize. Outsource everything. Focus on services. Step 2. Deregulate finance. Let banks and investors run wild. Step 3. Inflate housing. Reward speculation. Create artificial scarcity. Step 4. Bring in record migration to keep demand high. Ignore the strain on infrastructure. Step 5. Privatize public assets. Sell utilities, rail, healthcare. Let the market decide. Step 6. Shift. Blame. Say young people are lazy, blame global markets. Pretend there is no alternative. The outcome is predictable: a hollowed-out middle class, unaffordable cities, and governments more loyal to lobbyists than voters. Chapter 5. Healthcare in Crisis. Across all three nations. Britain's NHS is collapsing, but so is Canada's system, and Australia is not far behind. In Canada, patients wait up to 20 hours in emergency rooms. Family doctors are impossible to find. Mental health services are overstretched. In Australia, the story is eerily similar. Bulk billing is disappearing. Waitlists for surgeries stretch into months. Regional hospitals are closing or relying on underpaid locums. This is what happens when public health care is treated as a cost to cut, not a system to protect. Just like housing and energy, healthcare has been slowly commodified. Chapter 6. A generation paying the price. The young are paying for mistakes they did not make. In Britain, the average student graduates with over £40,000 of debt, only to enter a job market with unstable wages and no housing. In Canada, Gen Z and millennials are burdened with high student loans, mortgage rates over 6%, and zero hope of affording a home. In Australia, HECS debts rise with inflation. Renters are locked out of savings. The full-time job is becoming rarer. Side hustles and second jobs are the new normal. And across all three countries, fertility rates are dropping. Not because people don't want kids, but because they cannot afford to raise them. This is what generational theft looks like. Chapter 7. Real Australians, Real Consequences. James, age 29, has 2 degrees and works full-time in Melbourne, and still lives with his parents because rent would eat 70% of his take-home pay. Priya, a single mother in Western Sydney, spends 3 hours commuting because she cannot afford to live near her workplace. Tony, a retired factory worker in Adelaide, watches his suburb fill with empty investment properties while his grandkids are stuck in a 2-bedroom flat. Georgia, a nurse in Brisbane, is leaving for New Zealand because her salary does not cover rising rent and groceries. Kai, an electrician in Perth, is seeing fewer apprentices than ever, because no one wants to train for jobs that are being outsourced or underpaid. These are not exceptions. These are symptoms of a collapsing model. Chapter 8. Can this be reversed? It is not too late, but it requires courage. We need to rebuild local industry. That means investing in Australian manufacturing, making things here, and protecting national supply chains. We must definancialize housing, remove negative gearing, stop treating homes as tax shelters, cap foreign ownership, build public housing at scale. We must halt immigration until infrastructure catches up. Growth without planning is not sustainable. We must bring back public ownership of energy, water, transport, and healthcare. These are not markets. They are rights. And we must break the stranglehold of big donors on our political system. Real anti-corruption bodies, donation caps, transparency at all levels. Chapter 9. Final thoughts. Time is running out. The United Kingdom is past the point of reform. Canada is already unraveling, but Australia still has a window, a small one. We can change course, but not with the same leaders, the same policies, and the same lies. We are not imagining the collapse. We are living it. But if we act, we can still stop it. 3 nations, same collapse. Only one can still change the ending. Subscribe to Outback Crisis for more truth on how Australia got here and where we go next. To understand how we gambled our wealth and lost our future, watch this next video here.